I won't marry that pig. The words Clara Whitmore had been choking on for 6 months finally exploded in the church, silencing 200 gasping witnesses. Her father's face turned purple. Her mother collapsed into the pews. And Victor Hale, the railroad heir who'd spent half a year publicly measuring her waistline like livestock, stood frozen at the altar, his practiced smile cracking into something ugly and dangerous. But Clara was done shrinking. If you want to see how one woman's rebellion shook an entire frontier town to its foundation, stay until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The measuring tape cut into Clara Whitmore's ribs like a punishment. 34 inches, her mother announced to the cramped parlor, her voice flat with disappointment. Still 34 inches. You haven't lost a single measurement this month. Clara stood in her chemise in the middle of the room, arms raised, while her mother circled her like a farmer inspecting a failing crop. Afternoon light sliced through the lace curtains of the Whitmore home, illuminating dust motes and Clara's shame in equal measure. Outside, Black Hollow Ridge baked under the relentless Montana sun. But inside this room, Clara felt frozen. "That's impossible," her father barked from his chair near the window. Howard Whitmore didn't look up from the railroad contract he'd been pretending to read for the last 20 minutes. "She's been eating nothing but broth and vinegar for weeks." "Perhaps she's sneaking food," her younger sister Penelope offered from the corner, her voice dripping with false concern. At 17, Penny was everything Clara wasn't, slender, delicate, with blonde curls that caught light like spun gold. "I heard Mrs. Patterson say she saw Clara near the bakery on Tuesday." "I was delivering orders," Clara said quietly, lowering her arms. The measuring tape had left red welts across her skin. "The bakery is still our business, or have you forgotten that's how we eat?" "Watch your tone," her mother snapped, yanking the tape tighter around Clara's waist for a second measurement. "And Mrs. Patterson specifically mentioned you were eating something." Clara's jaw tightened. She had eaten something, a single roll that had burned in the oven, unsellable, destined for the trash. She'd consumed it standing over the ash bin, tears streaming down her face from hunger so intense it made her hands shake. That had been her only solid food in 3 days. "I had a burned roll that would have been thrown away regardless." Her father's fist slammed against the side table, making the oil lamp jump. "Do you think this is a game, Clara? Do you have any comprehension of what's at stake?" Clara did know. She knew down to the exact dollar amount, because her father reminded her every single day. $3,000. That was the investment Victor Hale had promised to make in Howard Whitmore's failing freight business. Enough to save the family from complete financial ruin, enough to preserve their standing in Black Hollow Ridge's fragile social hierarchy, enough to keep them from losing the house that had been in the Whitmore family for 2 generations. $3,000 in exchange for Clara's hand in marriage. Or rather, in exchange for a version of Clara that Victor Hale deemed presentable. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, her mother said, coiling the measuring tape with sharp, precise movements. 6 weeks, Clara, and you've made no progress whatsoever." "I've lost 12 pounds, Clara protested, hating the defensive tremor in her voice. "Dr. Callahan confirmed it last week." 12 pounds, her father repeated, finally looking at her. His face was gaunt, aged a decade in the 6 months since he'd arranged this nightmare. "Victor expected you to lose 30. 30 pounds in 6 months was the agreement. You're not even halfway there." The agreement. As if Clara had been part of the negotiation. As if anyone had asked her opinion before her father shook hands with Victor Hale in the smoke-filled back room of the Lucky Dollar Saloon, trading his daughter's future for financial salvation. "Maybe the measurements are wrong," Penny suggested, examining her reflection in the small mirror near the door. "Maybe she's just built differently. Some women are simply larger framed." The pity in her sister's voice was somehow worse than the criticism. "Victor was very specific about his requirements," their mother said coldly. "He wants a wife who reflects well on his position. The Hales are the most prominent family between here and Helena. They have standards." Clara wanted to scream that she had standards too, that she'd once had dreams beyond being reshaped like clay to suit a man she barely knew. She'd wanted to expand her bakery, maybe open a second location in one of the growing mining towns. She'd wanted to experiment with French pastry techniques she'd read about in a cookbook from San Francisco. She'd wanted a partner who loved her sharp mind and skilled hands, not someone who viewed her as a public relations problem to be solved. But wanting things had become a luxury Clara could no longer afford. The vinegar treatments clearly aren't working, her father said, rising from his chair. Tomorrow we'll visit Dr. Callahan again. There must be stronger options. Clara's stomach churned. Dr. Callahan's treatments had already progressed from herbal teas to purgatives that left her weak and dizzy. The last tonic he'd prescribed had made her so violently ill she'd been bedridden for 2 days, unable to work, unable to do anything but stare at the ceiling and wonder if this was how her life would end, not with a bang, but with a slow, medically sanctioned starvation. "I have orders to fill tomorrow," Clara said. "The Henderson wedding cake, the—" "Penny can handle it," her mother interrupted. "Penny doesn't know the recipes." "Then write them down for her." Her mother's tone left no room for argument. "Your only job right now is to become the woman Victor Hale agreed to marry. Everything else is secondary." The woman Victor Hale agreed to marry. Not Clara Whitmore, baker and businesswoman. Not Clara Whitmore, daughter and sister. Just a collection of measurements that needed to shrink, a body that needed to disappear inch by inch until she became acceptable. "Get dressed," her father ordered. "Victor is coming for supper tonight. Try to be pleasant. And for heaven's sake, don't eat anything. Just push the food around your plate." 1. Victor Hale arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, as he always did, in a carriage that cost more than most families in Black Hollow Ridge earned in a year. Clara watched from the upstairs window as he climbed down, adjusting his silk cravat and brushing imaginary dust from his tailored jacket. At 32, Victor was handsome in the way expensive things often were, polished, precisely arranged, fundamentally hollow. His dark hair gleamed with pomade, and his mustache was trimmed with mathematical precision. He looked like a man who had never been denied anything in his entire life, because he hadn't been. The Hale family owned the railroad spur that connected Black Hollow Ridge to the main line. They owned the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties. They owned the bank, the general store, and half the commercial buildings on Main Street. In a town of 800 souls, the Hales were royalty, and Victor was the crown prince. A crown prince who had deigned to notice Clara exactly once, at a church social 8 months ago, when she'd won the pie baking contest for the 3rd consecutive year. He'd approached her afterward, complimented her lattice work, and asked if she might make a special order for his mother's birthday. Clara had been foolish enough to feel flattered. 2 weeks later, her father had come home drunk and desperate, waiving the contract that would save the family business. All Clara had to do was marry Victor Hale. Simple. Easy. Except for the list of conditions Victor's lawyer had attached to the agreement. The bride-to-be must reduce her current measurements by a minimum of 30 pounds prior to the wedding ceremony. She must dress in a manner befitting the Hale family's social position. She must discontinue any public commercial activities, as the wife of Victor Hale would not engage in trade. She must be gracious, demure, and above all, presentable. Presentable. That word had haunted Clara for 6 months. "Clara!" Her mother's voice echoed up the stairs. "Victor is here. Come down immediately." Clara took one last look at herself in the mirror. The dress her mother had insisted she wear was one size too small, a deliberate choice designed to motivate her. The seams cut into her sides, and the tight bodice made it difficult to breathe deeply. Her dark hair was pulled back so severely it gave her a headache, and her face looked hollow, not from weight loss, but from exhaustion and hunger and the slow death of hope. She looked like a woman being erased. Downstairs, Victor stood in the parlor, accepting a glass of brandy from her father with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being served. He smiled when Clara entered, but his eyes performed their usual inspection, a quick clinical assessment that started at her face and traveled downward, measuring, judging, finding her wanting. "Clara," he said warmly, taking her hand and kissing it with practiced gallantry. "You look lovely this evening." The lie hung in the air between them. "Thank you," Clara murmured, because that was her role now. Accept the compliments that weren't compliments. Smile through the insults disguised as concern. Pretend this was a normal courtship instead of a transaction. "Shall we sit?" her mother suggested, gesturing toward the dining room where the table had been set with their finest china. Another performance for Victor's benefit. Dinner was torture. Clara's plate held a tiny portion of plain chicken and steamed vegetables, while everyone else enjoyed pot roast, potatoes, and the rolls Clara herself had baked that morning before her mother confiscated them. She pushed food around her plate as instructed, taking small bites that she chewed slowly, trying to make her meager portion last. Victor dominated the conversation. talking about the railroad expansion, about his recent trip to San Francisco, about the grand plans his father had for developing Black Hollow Ridge into a proper city. Of course, that will require the right sort of people in leadership positions, Victor said, cutting into his third helping of pot roast. Families with vision, with standards. Too many frontier towns remain crude because they lack proper society. Absolutely right, Howard agreed eagerly, which is why this union is so important. Combining our family's strengths, building something lasting. Clara noticed Victor glance at her plate, noting how much she'd eaten, calculating. She set down her fork, no longer hungry anyway. Hunger had become such a constant companion that she barely recognized the sensation anymore. It was just the background hum of her existence now, like the sound of wind or the tick of the parlor clock. "Clara," Victor said, turning his attention fully to her for the first time that evening. "Your mother mentioned you've been experiencing some difficulty with the preparation regimen." Preparation regimen. As if shrinking herself was equivalent to studying for an examination. "I'm doing my best," Clara said quietly. "Of course you are," Victor replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "But perhaps your best needs to be better. The wedding is only 6 weeks away, and frankly, I'm concerned about the timeline." The table fell silent. Even Penny stopped picking at her food. "Dr. Callahan has been very helpful," Clara's mother interjected quickly. "We're exploring additional treatments." "That's good to hear," Victor said, taking a slow sip of wine. "Because I want to be very clear about my expectations. The Hale family has a certain reputation to maintain. My wife will be representing not just me, but my father's business interests, our family name, our position in society. She needs to look the part." Clara's hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. "When I agreed to this arrangement," Victor continued, looking directly at Howard now, "I was assured that Clara understood the conditions and was fully committed to meeting them. I've been more than patient, I think. 6 months is a generous timeline, but I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps this isn't going to work out after all." The threat landed like a physical blow. Howard's face went white. "Now, Victor," he said quickly, "there's no need to talk about backing out. Clara is committed. We're all committed. She's made excellent progress. 12 pounds, Victor interrupted, in 6 months. That's hardly excellent progress, Howard." "The last month has been particularly challenging," Clara's mother added desperately. "But we have a new plan. Dr. Callahan has recommended a more aggressive approach." "I don't want to hear about plans," Victor said, his pleasant facade cracking to reveal something harder underneath. "I want to see results, tangible, visible results. Is that understood?" He was looking at Clara now, and she recognized the expression on his face. She'd seen it before in the eyes of men bargaining over livestock at the auction yard. He was calculating whether she was worth the investment, whether she could be whipped into shape, whether she was salvageable. "I understand," Clara heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere far away. "Good." Victor's smile returned instantly, warm and empty. "Then we have nothing to worry about. I'm sure you'll make me very proud, Clara." The rest of dinner passed in a blur. Clara excused herself as soon as was polite, claiming a headache, which wasn't entirely false. The tight dress and empty stomach had combined to make her genuinely dizzy. She escaped to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the muffled sounds of Victor's departure, her father's obsequious goodbyes, the carriage wheels crunching down the drive. Then silence. Clara walked to her wardrobe and pulled out the dress she'd worn to last year's harvest festival, before the engagement, before the measuring tapes and vinegar treatments and shame. She held it against her body, remembering how she'd felt that night. Full, satisfied, competent. She'd supplied pies for the entire event, and people had lined up 3 deep at her table. She'd laughed with friends, danced with several respectable men who'd seemed genuinely interested in her conversation, and gone home tired but content. That woman felt like a stranger now. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Clara said, expecting her mother with another lecture. But it was Penny who slipped through the door, closing it quietly behind her. "I brought you something," Penny said, producing a roll wrapped in a napkin from the pocket of her skirt. "I hid it during dinner." Clara stared at the offering, tears pricking her eyes. Penny had been so distant lately, so caught up in her own social activities and suitors. This small kindness felt enormous. "Thank you," Clara whispered, taking the roll. It was still warm. Penny sat beside her on the bed, and for a moment they were just sisters again, not competitors or conspirators in the family drama. "I'm sorry," Penny said quietly, "for what I said earlier, about you sneaking food. That was cruel." Clara broke the roll in half, the steam rising in the cool room. She offered half to Penny, but her sister shook her head. "That's for you." Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying to make it last. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted, though it was probably indistinguishable from the hundreds of other rolls she'd made. "Do you love him?" Penny asked suddenly. "Victor?" Clara almost laughed. "Love. What a quaint concept." "No," she said honestly. "I don't even like him particularly." "Then why are you doing this?" Clara gestured vaguely at the room around them, at the house that represented everything her family had built, at the precarious security they were all clinging to. "Because if I don't, we lose everything. Father's business fails. We lose the house. Mother loses her standing in society. And you," Clara looked at her sister, "you lose your chance at a good match. No respectable family will consider a girl whose own family is destitute." "That's not fair," Penny protested. "That's not your responsibility." "Isn't it?" Clara finished the roll, licking the crumbs from her fingers. "I'm the oldest. I'm unmarried at 24. And apparently, I'm the only asset Father has left to bargain with." "You're not an asset. You're a person. Tell that to Victor Hale." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the walls amber and gold. In the distance, Clara could hear the sounds of Black Hollow Ridge settling in for the evening, horses being stabled, shop doors closing, the train whistle signaling the last arrival of the day. "What if you just left?" Penny suggested quietly. "Took the train somewhere. Started over." Clara had considered it. Of course she had. Late at night, starving and despairing, she'd imagined buying a ticket to San Francisco or Portland or anywhere that wasn't here. She'd imagined finding work in a bakery, renting a small room, building a life that belonged only to her. But then she'd think about her mother's face, her father's desperation, the way the business ledgers showed nothing but red ink, the mortgage payments they were already 3 months behind on. She'd think about Penny, who deserved a future that didn't include poverty and shame. And she'd stay. "I can't," Clara said simply. "Not yet." Penny squeezed her hand once, then left as quietly as she'd come. Clara lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the weeks until the wedding. 6 weeks. 42 days. 1,008 hours. 1,008 hours to become someone she wasn't. 1,008 hours to disappear. To chase. The next morning, Clara's mother dragged her back to Dr. Callahan's office. The doctor's practice occupied a narrow building on Main Street, sandwiched between the hardware store and a lawyer's office. The waiting room smelled of carbolic acid and desperation, that particular mixture of antiseptic and fear that seemed to permeate all frontier medical establishments. "Mrs. Whitmore, Miss Whitmore," Dr. Callahan greeted them, his spectacles reflecting the harsh morning light. He was a thin man with nervous hands and a tendency to avoid direct eye contact. "Please, come in." His examination room was cramped and overheated, with medical diagrams on the walls showing various anatomical cross-sections. Clara tried not to look at them as she sat on the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. "Your mother tells me the current regimen isn't producing the desired results," Dr. Callahan said, washing his hands in the basin. "How are you feeling generally?" "Tired," Clara admitted. "Dizzy sometimes. Cold, even when it's warm outside." "That's to be expected with rapid weight reduction," the doctor said dismissively. "Your body is adjusting to the new normal." The new normal of starvation, Clara thought, but didn't say. "We need something more effective," her mother said from the corner. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, and she's nowhere near the required measurements." Dr. Callahan dried his hands thoughtfully. "There are more aggressive options, but they do carry some risk." "What kind of risk?" Clara asked. "Nothing life-threatening," the doctor assured her quickly. "But the treatments can be unpleasant. There's a new preparation from New York. It contains thyroid extract and other compounds that stimulate the metabolism. Very effective for weight reduction." "Thyroid extract?" Clara had read enough to know that sounded dangerous. "Perfectly safe," Dr. Callahan said. "It's being used by all the finest ladies in New York and Boston. Of course, there can be some side effects." Palpitations, tremors, occasional digestive distress, but nothing that should prevent you from your daily activities. Her mother leaned forward eagerly. How quickly does it work? Most patients see significant results within 2 to 3 weeks. Combined with the dietary restrictions and the vinegar treatments, I believe we could achieve the necessary reduction before the wedding. Clara felt sick, not from hunger this time, but from the realization that they were discussing her body like it was a problem to be solved with chemicals and force. I'll need to examine you first, Dr. Callahan said, picking up his stethoscope, to ensure you're healthy enough for the treatment. The examination was brief and humiliating. He listened to her heart, checked her pulse, peered into her eyes and down her throat. He measured her again, recording numbers in his leather-bound journal with small, precise handwriting. Your vital signs are acceptable, he concluded, though your pulse is somewhat weak. That should improve once the treatment begins and your body adjusts to its proper weight. Proper weight. As if there was a mathematical formula for worth. I'll prepare the first dose now, Dr. Callahan said. You'll need to take it daily, first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. No food for at least 2 hours afterward. 2 hours? Clara's mother frowned. She's already not eating much. The medication works best when the stomach is empty. It allows for maximum absorption. The doctor began mixing compounds from various bottles, creating a murky brown liquid that looked like poison. It probably was poison, Clara thought, just a socially acceptable kind. Here we are, Dr. Callahan said, handing her a small glass. Drink it all at once. It may taste bitter. Clara looked at the glass, then at her mother's expectant face, then at the doctor's professionally detached expression. She thought about Victor Hale's calculating eyes, about her father's failing business, about Penny's future. She drank. The liquid burned going down, leaving a metallic taste that coated her tongue and throat. Almost immediately, her stomach cramped. Excellent, Dr. Callahan said, taking back the glass. You may experience some discomfort today as your body adjusts. That's perfectly normal. I'll prepare a week's supply for you to take home. As they left the doctor's office, Clara clutching a paper bag full of bottles, she caught sight of herself in the window of the general store. She looked like a ghost, hollow-eyed, pale, insubstantial. She looked like she was disappearing, and everyone in Black Hollow Ridge was watching it happen. Boss. 3 weeks later, Clara stood in her family's bakery kitchen before dawn, trying to remember the recipe for sourdough. Her hands shook as she measured flour. The tremors had started 5 days after beginning Dr. Callahan's treatment and hadn't stopped since. Her heart raced constantly, a hummingbird rhythm that never slowed, even during sleep. She'd lost another 8 pounds, bringing her total to 20, but the cost had been steep. She couldn't focus. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't think clearly through the fog of chemicals and hunger that had become her constant state. The bread dough blurred in front of her. Was it 2 cups of flour or 3? She'd made this recipe 1,000 times, could usually do it in her sleep, but now the measurements eluded her like water through a sieve. Damn it, she whispered, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. The bakery had been her sanctuary once, the place where she felt most competent, most herself. She'd learned the trade from her grandmother, spent years perfecting techniques, building a reputation that had drawn customers from neighboring towns. But Penny had taken over most of the daily operations now, following Clara's written recipes with mixed results. The bread was acceptable, but not exceptional. The pastries were adequate, but uninspired. Business had already started to decline, though no one mentioned it directly. Clara tried to knead the dough, but her arms had no strength. The simple motion that should have been automatic now felt like moving through mud. "You're up early," Penny said, appearing in the doorway in her nightgown. "Mother said you're supposed to be resting." "I can't rest," Clara said. "I can't sleep. The medication—" She stopped, not wanting to admit how badly the treatments were affecting her. Penny moved closer, and Clara saw real worry in her sister's eyes. "You look terrible, Clara, really terrible. Your hands are shaking, and you're gray." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're—" Penny reached out and touched Clara's forehead. "You're burning up." Clara pulled away. "It's just the medication. Dr. Callahan said this is normal." "Nothing about this is normal." Penny's voice rose, then dropped to an urgent whisper. "You're killing yourself for a man who doesn't even deserve you." "Don't," Clara warned. Don't make this harder than it already is.
How could it possibly be harder? You can barely stand, you can't focus. You're taking poison every morning and calling it medicine. When does it stop, Clara? When you collapse? When you die? When I'm thin enough, Clara said flatly. When Victor decides I'm presentable. When Father's business is saved and you can marry well and Mother can hold her head up in church. That's when it stops. The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty.
Penny's eyes filled with tears.
I don't want that. I never wanted this for you. What you want doesn't matter, Clara said, more harshly than she intended. What I want doesn't matter. This is bigger than us. No, Penny said fiercely. It's not. Father's business failing isn't your fault. Mother's social standing isn't your responsibility. And my future sure as hell shouldn't depend on you starving yourself into an early grave.
Clara wanted to believe her, wanted to set down the burden she'd been carrying and walk away from all of it. But the weight of expectation was too heavy, too ingrained. Just let me work, Clara said quietly. Please. Penny stood there a moment longer, then left without another word. Clara turned back to the dough, but her vision swam. The room tilted, and she gripped the counter for support. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her temples, in her fingertips. This was fine. This was normal. This was the cost of becoming presentable. She forced herself to keep kneading, though every movement felt like wading through quicksand. The bread had to be perfect. Everything had to be perfect, because in 3 weeks she would stand at the altar in a dress that finally fit, beside a man who had finally deemed her acceptable, and everyone would see that she'd been worth the investment after all. In 3 weeks, she would become Mrs. Victor Hale. In 3 weeks, Clara Whitmore would cease to exist entirely. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt nothing at all. On a bright Thursday afternoon 2 weeks before the wedding, Clara's world collapsed in front of the entire town. She'd been standing in the general store, waiting while Mr. Henderson tallied her order of sugar and flour. The store was crowded with the usual afternoon shoppers, women comparing fabric samples, men discussing the price of cattle, children eyeing the candy jars with desperate longing. Clara felt the episode coming a moment before it hit, the familiar racing heart accelerating to something impossible, the room tilting sideways, the ground rushing up to meet her. She didn't remember falling. She came to on the floor, surrounded by concerned faces and scandalized whispers. Mrs. Patterson was fanning her with a newspaper. Mr. Henderson was calling for someone to fetch Dr. Callahan. And somewhere in the crowd, she heard Victor Hale's voice, tight with embarrassment. For heaven's sake, give her air. She's just overwrought. All women get emotional during wedding preparations. Clara tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Her heart still raced, and her vision kept graying at the edges. Don't move, dear, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice rich with false concern and genuine curiosity. You've had quite a spell. I'm fine, Clara managed, though she very clearly wasn't. Dr. Callahan arrived within minutes, his bag in hand, his face professionally neutral. He knelt beside Clara, checking her pulse, her pupils, asking questions she could barely process. When did you last eat, Miss Whitmore? Clara couldn't remember. Yesterday morning? The day before? She's been on a special dietary regimen, Victor interjected, suddenly very concerned about appearances. For her health. Perhaps it's been too restrictive. The irony would have been funny if Clara had the energy to laugh. Dr. Callahan helped her to her feet, and the room spun violently. She would have fallen again if he hadn't caught her. I'm taking you home, the doctor said firmly. You need rest and proper supervision. I have orders to fill, Clara protested weakly. The orders can wait, Victor said, his tone brooking no argument, but she could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the embarrassment of his fiancée collapsing in public against the inconvenience of canceling their wedding plans. The ride home was a blur. Clara slumped in Dr. Callahan's buggy, only vaguely aware of the concerned glances from passers-by. By the time they reached the Whitmore house, her mother was already in a panic. News traveled fast in Black Hollow Ridge. What happened? Margaret Whitmore demanded as the doctor helped Clara inside. She collapsed at Henderson's store, Dr. Callahan said, guiding Clara to the sofa. Her pulse is dangerously elevated, and she shows signs of severe exhaustion. The treatment, Clara's mother began. The treatment needs to stop, Dr. Callahan interrupted, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Guilt, perhaps, or belated conscience. Immediately. But the wedding is in 2 weeks. Mrs. Whitmore, your daughter's heart is beating at nearly twice its normal rate. Her hands won't stop shaking. She's severely malnourished. If she continues this way, there may not be a wedding because there may not be a bride. The stark words hung in the air. Clara's mother sank into a chair, her face pale. What are you saying? I'm saying I may have been too aggressive with the treatment. The thyroid extract, combined with the dietary restrictions. The doctor trailed off, seemingly unable to finish the thought. You're the one who prescribed it, Margaret accused. You said it was safe. I said it was being used in New York. I didn't say... Dr. Callahan stopped, collected himself. Miss Whitmore needs rest, regular meals, and no more medications. Her body needs time to recover. And Victor's requirements? Her mother asked desperately. The measurements? Will have to be secondary to keeping your daughter alive, the doctor said bluntly. Clara listened to this conversation from what felt like a great distance. They were still talking about her like she was an object, a problem, a project that had gone wrong. Even now, on the edge of collapse, they were calculating whether she was salvageable. Over the next few days, Clara stayed in bed, trying to recover. Her mother brought her bland foods, broths, soft breads, nothing that might upset her ravaged system. But eating had become psychologically impossible. Every bite triggered waves of guilt and panic. She'd spent so long associating food with failure that her body now rejected it automatically. Victor visited once, standing awkwardly at the foot of her bed, like she was a disappointing investment. The doctor says you'll be recovered in time for the wedding, he said, not quite making it a question. Yes, Clara answered, because what else could she say? Good, we've already sent the invitations. It would be terribly awkward to postpone. He adjusted his cufflinks, clearly uncomfortable in the sick room. Perhaps you should ease up on the dietary restrictions for now. We can address your figure after the wedding. There are corsets that can help in the meantime. After the wedding, as if shrinking her would become a lifelong project, an endless process of restriction and shame. Of course, Clara said numbly. Victor left quickly, relieved to escape. Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was her future. A lifetime of making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for her. A week before the wedding, her mother insisted she get fitted for her dress one final time. The dressmaker, Mrs. Chen, had done her best with an impossible assignment, creating a gown that would simultaneously flatter and conceal, that would make Clara look appropriately bridal while minimizing her size. The dress was beautiful, objectively, layers of ivory silk and lace, tiny pearl buttons down the back, a train that would sweep dramatically down the church aisle. It also didn't fit. Despite the weight loss, despite the treatments and the starvation and the suffering, Clara still couldn't close the final 6 buttons on the bodice. We can let it out, Mrs. Chen said diplomatically, her mouth full of pins. There's no more fabric to let out, Clara's mother said, her voice sharp with stress. Can you add panels? Not without it being obvious, the lace pattern. Then make it work, Margaret snapped. The wedding is in 6 days. Clara stood on the fitting platform, arms raised, while they discussed solutions around her. The dress cut into her ribs, the boning pressed against her spine. She couldn't breathe deeply, couldn't move naturally. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman in a beautiful prison, trapped in fabric and expectations and other people's requirements. Maybe, Clara heard herself say, maybe we should postpone. The room went silent. Postpone? Her mother repeated, as if Clara had suggested burning down the church. Just a few months, until I'm... Absolutely not, Margaret said firmly. Do you have any idea how much we've spent on this wedding? How many people are expecting it? What Victor would think? What Victor would think, because his opinion was the only one that mattered. The dress will be ready, Mrs. Chen said quietly, kindly. I promise, Miss Whitmore, you'll look beautiful. But Clara didn't want to look beautiful. She wanted to breathe. She wanted to eat without guilt. She wanted to exist in her own body without apologizing for every inch of space she occupied. She wanted to disappear, not physically, but from this entire nightmare. And in 6 days, she would stand at the altar and make that disappearance permanent. The morning of the dress-fitting disaster, Clara made a decision that would change everything. She waited until her mother left for the church auxiliary meeting, until Penny departed for her piano lesson, until the house fell into that particular midday silence that meant she was truly alone. Then she changed into her oldest work dress, pinned up her hair, and slipped out the back door. She didn't have a plan. She just needed to walk, to move, to exist somewhere beyond the measuring tapes and mirror reflections and constant scrutiny. Her feet carried her past the edge of town, past the last scattered homesteads, onto the dusty road that led toward the open range. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly, and within 20 minutes Clara was dizzy again. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's thin soup, and Dr. Callahan's poison was still working its way through her system despite being discontinued. Her heart raced. Her vision blurred at the edges. She should turn back. She knew she should turn back. But turning back meant returning to the house where her wedding dress hung like a beautiful noose, where her mother would have 17 new ideas about how to make Clara more acceptable, where the calendar on the wall marked off the remaining days of her freedom with brutal precision. So she kept walking. The road narrowed, became less traveled. Sagebrush stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and the distant shapes of cattle. Clara had no idea where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stop. When she finally collapsed, it wasn't dramatic like in the general store. She simply sat down in the middle of the road because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. And then she lay back in the dust because sitting required too much effort. And then the sky above her started spinning in slow, nauseating circles. This is it, she thought distantly. This is how I die. Starved and dizzy on a forgotten road, 5 days before I was supposed to become someone else's property. There was a certain poetry to it. She didn't hear the horse approach, didn't register the sound of boots hitting the ground or the shadow falling across her face. The first thing she was truly aware of was a rough hand on her shoulder and a deep voice cutting through the fog. "Miss, can you hear me?" Clara opened her eyes and found herself looking up at a stranger. He was crouched beside her, his face creased with concern, his eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. He wore a dusty work shirt and denim pants, a wide-brimmed hat pushed back from his forehead, and he looked at her like she was a person instead of a problem. "I'm fine," Clara said automatically, trying to sit up. The world tilted violently, and only his steadying hand kept her from falling back. "You're clearly not fine," he said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "When's the last time you ate something?" "I don't remember." "Drank water?" Clara blinked. Water. When had she last had water? The stranger, tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his early 30s, stood and moved to his horse, a sturdy bay mare who watched the proceedings with intelligent eyes. He returned with a canteen and held it out to her. "Drink, slowly." The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, and it was the most wonderful thing Clara had ever experienced. She forced herself to sip rather than gulp, though every cell in her body screamed for more. "That's good," the stranger said. "Not too much at once, or you'll be sick. What are you doing out here alone?" "Walking," Clara said, which was technically true if utterly insufficient as an explanation. "Walking where?" "Away." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "You're on private property, you know. Mercer land. Most people from town know to keep to the main road." Mercer. The name rang a distant bell. One of the ranchers who kept to himself, who came to town only for essential supplies, who had a reputation for being difficult and unfriendly. He didn't look difficult. He looked concerned. "I'm sorry," Claire said. "I'll go." "You're in no condition to go anywhere." He studied her with an assessing gaze that felt different from the way Victor looked at her. This wasn't judgment. It was evaluation, the kind of person might give a horse with a stone bruise or a fence post that needed shoring up. Practical. Problem-solving. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" "I eat," Clara said defensively. "That's not what I asked." Clara looked away, focusing on the horizon where heat waves made the air shimmer like water. "A while." "A while," he repeated, and there was something hard in his voice now, not directed at her, she realized, but at the situation. "You're Clara Whitmore, aren't you? The baker. I've seen you at Henderson's store." "Yes." "Cole Mercer." He didn't offer his hand, just stood and moved back to his horse. "Can you ride?" "I'm really fine to walk." "You can barely stand. You're not walking anywhere."
So can you ride, or do I need to tie you to the saddle like cargo? The absurdity of the image, her trussed like a sack of flour across a stranger's horse, startled a laugh out of Clara. It came out rusty and strange, like a door that hadn't been opened in months. I can ride, she said. Cole brought the mare over and helped Clara to her feet. She swayed dangerously, and his hand moved to her elbow, steadying but not presumptuous. Up you go, he said, and before Clara could protest, he'd lifted her onto the horse with an ease that suggested he regularly hefted things much heavier than half-starved women. He swung up behind her, and Clara found herself pressed against his chest, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. She should have been scandalized, should have insisted on walking, should have at least protested the impropriety, but she was too tired to care about propriety anymore. Where are we going? She asked as the horse started moving. My ranch. It's closer than town, and you need food and rest before you try to go anywhere else. People will talk. People always talk. Cole guided the horse with practiced ease, following a path only he could see through the sagebrush. You worried about your reputation? Clara almost laughed again. Her reputation was already shredded. The whole town had watched her starve herself for 6 months. They'd witnessed her collapse in Henderson's store. They whispered about her behind gloved hands at church, speculating about whether Victor would really go through with the wedding. I'm engaged, she said instead. I know, to Victor Hale. The whole territory knows. There was something in Cole's voice she couldn't quite identify. Is he the reason you're starving yourself? The bluntness of the question shocked her. Everyone else danced around the reality with euphemisms. Dietary regimens, health treatments, preparation for marriage. Cole just said it plainly. Starving. It's complicated, Clara said. It's really not. Either he accepts you as you are, or he doesn't. Seems pretty simple to me. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it. Clara twisted to look at him and found his face closer than expected. His eyes were steady, genuinely curious, not mocking or judging, just waiting. My family's business is failing, she heard herself say. The words came easier than expected, maybe because he was a stranger, maybe because she was too exhausted to maintain the careful fiction anymore. Victor agreed to invest $3,000 in exchange for marrying me, but only if I lost 30 pounds first. If I don't marry him, we lose everything. So he's buying you. It's not like that, it's exactly like that. He's purchasing a wife who meets his specifications, and you're the product being modified to fit his requirements. Cole's voice was flat, stating facts. How much have you lost? 20 pounds. And how much more does he want? 10. But the wedding is in 5 days, and I can't. Clara's voice broke. I can't lose 10 more pounds in 5 days. It's impossible. Good, Cole said firmly, because you shouldn't. You look like a strong wind would blow you over as it is. They crested a small rise, and Clara saw the Mercer Ranch spread out below. A sturdy log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance cattle dotting the rangeland. It was modest compared to the Hale estate, but well-maintained, purposeful. Welcome to the edge of civilization, Cole said with a hint of dry humor. It's not much, but it's mine. He helped her down from the horse with the same easy competence he seemed to apply to everything, then led her toward the house. Clara's legs trembled with each step, and by the time they reached the porch, she was leaning heavily on his arm. Inside, the house was simple but clean. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a solid wooden table in the center. The furniture was handmade but well-crafted. Books lined a shelf near the window. Sit, Cole ordered, pulling out a chair at the table. Clara sat, too tired to argue. She watched as he moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire, pulling bread and cheese from a cupboard, slicing both with a knife that caught the light. He poured milk from a covered pitcher and set everything in front of her. Eat slowly, he said. Your stomach isn't used to real food anymore. If you eat too fast, you'll just bring it back up. Clara stared at the simple meal. The bread was thick and grainy, the cheese sharp and crumbly, the milk cool and rich. It was more food than she'd seen in weeks, and the sight of it triggered a wave of panic so intense she couldn't breathe. I can't, she whispered. Why not? Because if I eat this, I'll gain weight. If I gain weight, the dress won't fit. If the dress doesn't fit, Victor will be embarrassed. If Victor is embarrassed, he'll cancel the wedding. If he cancels the wedding,
Your family loses everything, Cole finished. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his expression thoughtful. So you're choosing slow death by starvation over fast death by financial ruin. That's not fair. It's accurate. He pushed the plate closer to her. Eat something, Clara. You can hate yourself for it later if that makes you feel better, but right now, eat. His tone left no room for argument. Clara picked up the bread with shaking hands and took a small bite. The taste exploded across her tongue, salt and grain and substance. Her body recognized it as what it desperately needed, and suddenly she was ravenous. Slowly, Cole reminded her, and Clara forced herself to chew properly, to take breaks between bites, to drink the milk in small sips. They sat in silence while she ate. Cole didn't hover or comment or watch her with the calculated assessment she was used to. He just sat quietly, occasionally glancing out the window at his land, giving her the space to simply be. When Clara finally pushed the plate away, having eaten half of what he'd given her, she felt simultaneously better and worse. Better because her body finally had fuel. Worse because she'd just undone days of restriction, and the guilt crashed over her in waves. "How do you feel?" Cole asked. "Guilty?" "Honest, at least." He collected the dishes and brought them to the wash basin. "You can rest here if you want. There's a spare room upstairs. I've got work to do, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Clara should have refused, should have insisted on returning to town immediately. But the thought of facing her mother, of explaining where she'd been, of putting on that dress again and pretending everything was fine, it was too much. "Just for an hour," she said. "Take as long as you need." The spare room was small and plainly furnished. A narrow bed with a thick quilt, a washstand, a window overlooking the corral. Clara lay down, intending to rest just a moment, and fell immediately into the first deep sleep she'd had in months. When she woke, the light had changed. The harsh midday sun had softened into late afternoon amber. Clara sat up, disoriented, her heart racing with panic. How long had she been asleep? What time was it? She rushed downstairs and found Cole at the table, working on tack repair, a half-empty coffee cup at his elbow. "What time is it?" Clara asked urgently. "About 4. You slept almost 3 hours." 3 hours. Her mother would be frantic. The entire town would be searching. Victor would be furious. "I have to go," Clara said, already moving toward the door. "I'll take you back." Cole set down the leather strap he'd been mending. "But you should eat something first." "I can't. I've already—" "You had bread and cheese 6 hours ago. That's not enough fuel for the ride back." He was already moving to the kitchen, pulling out cold chicken and biscuits. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Clara wanted to refuse, but her body was already responding to the smell of food, and she realized with a start that she was genuinely hungry. Not the hollow, gnawing hunger she'd grown accustomed to, but real, healthy appetite. She ate standing up, too anxious to sit. Cole saddled his horse and brought it around to the front porch. The ride back to town was quiet. Clara sat in front of Cole again, watching Black Hollow Ridge grow larger on the horizon, feeling the weight of reality settling back onto her shoulders. "Thank you," she said as they approached the outskirts of town, "for the food and the rest, and not asking too many questions." "I asked plenty of questions," Cole corrected. "You just didn't answer most of them." "I barely know you." Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than family. They reached the edge of Main Street, and Cole pulled the horse to a stop, helping Clara down in the shadow of the feed store where fewer people would see. "Will you be all right?" he asked, and the genuine concern in his voice almost undid her. "I have to be," Clara said. "The wedding is in 5 days." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." Cole studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the unsettling feeling he could see straight through all her careful defenses to the terrified woman beneath. "If you need anything," he said finally, "the offer stands. Food, shelter, an ear to listen. No judgment." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned toward home. She made it 3 steps before Cole called after her. "Clara?" She looked back. "You're worth more than $3,000, he said quietly. "You know that, right?" Clara didn't answer. She just walked away, his words echoing in her head, wondering if he was right, and terrified of what it would mean if he was. The house was in chaos when Clara slipped in through the back door.
She could hear her mother's voice from the parlor, shrill with worry, and her father's deeper rumble responding. Penny appeared in the kitchen doorway, relief washing over her face. "Where have you been?" her sister hissed. "Mother is beside herself. She was about to send father to search the countryside." "I went for a walk and lost track of time," Clara said, the lie sliding out smoothly. "For 6 hours. I fell asleep under a tree." Penny's eyes narrowed. She knew Clara was lying, but before she could press further, their mother swept into the kitchen. "Clara Whitmore, do you have any idea what you've put this family through?" Margaret's face was blotchy with tears and rage. "Disappearing the week before your wedding, sending the entire household into a panic." "I'm sorry," Clara said automatically. "I just needed some air." "Air? You needed air!" Her mother's voice climbed higher. "Victor was here. He came to discuss the final arrangements, and you were nowhere to be found. Do you understand how that looked?" "What did you tell him?" "That you were at the dressmaker's, of course. But he wants to see you tomorrow, first thing. He has concerns about your commitment to this marriage." Of course he did. Victor's concerns were the axis around which Clara's entire world now revolved. "I'll see him," Clara said quietly. "You'll do more than see him. You'll reassure him. You'll be gracious and grateful and everything a future Hale wife should be." Margaret gripped Clara's shoulders. "We are 5 days away from saving this family. 5 days. Do not ruin this with your selfishness." Selfishness. The word struck Clara like a slap. Wanting to eat was selfish. Wanting to breathe was selfish. Wanting to exist without apologizing for the space she occupied was selfish. "I won't ruin it," Clara heard herself say. Her mother's expression softened fractionally. "Good. Now go upstairs and make yourself presentable for dinner. Your father is in a state, and we need to show a united front." Clara climbed the stairs to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, still tasting bread and cheese on her tongue, still feeling the solid warmth of Cole's presence at her back during the ride home. She touched her stomach, fuller now than it had been in weeks. Evidence of her failure, of her weakness, of her inability to maintain the discipline required to become Victor's wife. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel hollow. Over the next 3 days, Clara existed in a strange duality. Publicly, she played the role of dutiful bride-to-be, meeting with Victor to discuss their honeymoon plans, accepting congratulations from church ladies, smiling through the rehearsal dinner. Privately, she thought constantly about Cole Mercer's ranch, about the simple meal he'd offered without conditions, about the way he'd looked at her like she was a person worth saving. She couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, "You're worth more than $3,000. The problem was, Clara had spent so long being reduced to a price tag that she no longer knew what she was worth beyond that number. On Wednesday evening, 2 days before the wedding, Clara returned to the bakery after hours to retrieve her grandmother's recipes. Penny had moved most of the daily operations there, but Clara wanted to ensure the original handwritten cards were preserved. They were the last thing she had that felt truly hers. She was sorting through the recipe box when she heard the knock on the back door. Her first thought was that it was Penny forgetting her key, but when Clara opened the door, she found Cole Mercer standing in the alley, his hat in his hands. "I know I shouldn't be here," he said without preamble, "but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about the wedding being in 5 days, about you having no choice." "What are you doing here?" Clara whispered, glancing nervously at the street beyond the alley. "Giving you another option." Cole's eyes were serious. "Don't marry him, Clara." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. Your family needs money. Victor has money, so you're trading yourself to save them. But there are other ways." "Like what?" Clara demanded. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. Father's business is failing. What other ways are there?" "I could loan your father the money." Clara stared at him. "You don't even know us." "I know you. That's enough." Cole shifted his weight. "No conditions. No requirements that you change yourself or become someone different. Just a business loan, same as any bank would offer." "Why would you do that?" "Because watching someone destroy themselves to meet someone else's standards is wrong." He spoke with quiet conviction. "Because you bake bread that tastes like sunshine. Because you collapsed on my land and trusted me enough to eat when you were starving. Because in the 3 hours we spent together, I saw more genuine spirit in you than most people show in a lifetime." Clara's throat tightened. "I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's a loan.
Your father pays me back with interest, same as he would the bank. Cole stepped closer. I'm not asking you to marry me instead. I'm not asking for anything except that you not sacrifice yourself for a man who sees you as a business acquisition. You barely know me, Clara repeated, but her conviction was wavering. Then let me know you better, after you've called off the wedding, after you've eaten real food and remembered what it feels like to take up space in the world without apologizing. Cole's voice was steady. I'm not saying we'd have a future together. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. But at least you'd have the freedom to find out instead of being locked into a marriage that's already killing you. Clara wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to accept his offer, to walk away from Victor and the measurements and the shame. But the weight of expectation was too heavy. My mother would never forgive me, she said quietly. My father would see it as the ultimate betrayal. And Penny, her marriage prospects depend on our family maintaining respectability. If I jilt Victor Hale at the altar, we become a scandal. No amount of money fixes that. So you're going to martyr yourself to preserve their social standing? I'm going to do what families do, sacrifice for each other. Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. That only works if the sacrifice goes both ways, Clara. What has your family sacrificed for you? The question hit her like a physical blow because the answer was nothing. They'd sacrificed nothing. They'd demanded everything, her body, her health, her autonomy, her future, and offered nothing in return except the promise that if she disappeared enough, she might finally be acceptable. I should go, Clara said, because if she stayed any longer, she might do something foolish like believe him. If you change your mind, Cole said, I'll be at the church on Friday. I know I have no right to be there, but I'll be there anyway. In the back, just in case you need someone to remind you that there are other options. He left before Clara could respond, disappearing into the darkness of the alley like a ghost or a dream or a possibility she didn't dare believe in. Clara stood in the empty bakery, surrounded by the smell of flour and yeast and all the things she'd built with her own hands, and wondered what would happen if she was brave enough to choose herself. But bravery, she'd learned, was a luxury she couldn't afford. The wedding was in 2 days, and Clara Whitmore had run out of time. The morning of the wedding arrived with cruel clarity. Bright sun, cloudless sky. The kind of perfect day that mocked everything Clara felt inside. She woke at dawn to the sound of her mother bustling through the house, issuing orders to Penny about flowers and seating arrangements and a dozen other details that suddenly seemed monumentally unimportant. Clara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting her heartbeats and wondering if it was possible to simply refuse to get up, to stay in this bed forever and let the wedding happen without her. But her mother appeared in the doorway at 6:30, already dressed, her face a mask of determined cheerfulness. Today's the day, Margaret announced, as if Clara might have forgotten. Mrs. Chen will be here at 8 to help you dress. The photographer arrives at 9. The ceremony is at 11. Everything is perfect. Perfect. The word had lost all meaning. Clara forced herself out of bed and submitted to the morning's rituals. Her mother had arranged for a bath with special oils that were supposed to make her skin glow. A hairdresser from Helena had been hired to create an elaborate updo that required 47 pins and nearly 2 hours to complete. Penny fluttered around applying powder and rouge to Clara's face, trying to disguise the dark circles and hollow cheeks that 6 months of starvation had created. Through it all, Clara felt like she was watching someone else's life. This couldn't be happening to her. This was happening to some other woman, some Clara-shaped ghost who moved and breathed and responded appropriately, while the real Clara screamed silently inside. When Mrs. Chen arrived with the dress, Clara's stomach lurched. The seamstress had worked a minor miracle, adding invisible panels and restructuring the bodice so that it would close, barely, over Clara's frame. But the dress still felt like a cage, beautiful, expensive, suffocating. Arms up, Mrs. Chen instructed, and Clara raised her arms obediently while the older woman and Penny worked together to maneuver the heavy silk over her head. The fabric slithered down, cool against her skin. Penny began fastening the tiny pearl buttons, starting at the bottom and working upward. Clara focused on breathing shallowly, trying not to expand her rib cage too much, trying to take up as little space as possible. It's tight, Penny murmured when she reached the middle buttons. It has to be tight, their mother said sharply. Keep going. Penny continued fastening, and Clara felt each button close like a shackle. By the time they reached the top, she genuinely couldn't breathe deeply.
The boning pressed against her ribs, the bodice compressed her chest, and the weight of the skirt pulled at her waist. "There," Mrs. Chen said, stepping back to assess. "You look beautiful, Miss Whitmore." Clara turned to the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. The woman in the reflection wore an exquisite gown and an elaborate hairstyle. Her face was painted to hide the evidence of suffering. She looked like a bride from a magazine illustration, perfect, porcelain, utterly lifeless. "Clara?" Penny touched her arm gently. "Are you all right?" "No!" Clara wanted to scream. "I'm not all right. I'm terrified and trapped, and I don't want this." But saying it out loud would destroy everything: her family's finances, her mother's social standing, her father's last desperate gamble at salvation. "I'm fine," Clara whispered. "Just nervous." "Every bride is nervous," her mother said briskly, adjusting Clara's veil. "It's perfectly natural. Now, we need to leave in 15 minutes. The photographer wants pictures before the ceremony." Those 15 minutes passed in a blur of final adjustments and anxious instructions. Her mother reminded her to smile, to stand up straight, to remember that everyone would be watching. Penny pressed a handkerchief into her hand in case she cried. Mrs. Chen fussed over the train one last time. And then they were in the carriage, rolling toward the church, and Clara watched Black Hollow Ridge pass by the window. The general store where she'd collapsed, the bakery where Cole had found her in the alley, the streets she'd walked her entire life suddenly feeling foreign and far away. The church looked like something from a dream. White ribbons adorned every pew. Flowers cascaded from elaborate arrangements at the altar. Candles flickered in the morning light, creating an atmosphere of romance and sanctity that made Clara's skin crawl. The photographer was waiting on the steps, an energetic man from Helena who positioned Clara in a dozen different poses, standing alone, with her mother, with Penny, looking demure and joyful, and every other emotion she didn't actually feel. "Smile, Miss Whitmore," he kept saying. "This is the happiest day of your life." Clara smiled until her face ached. Inside the church, guests were already arriving. Clara caught glimpses of them through the door to the bride's preparation room. Mrs. Patterson in an enormous feathered hat, the Henderson family filling an entire pew, business associates of Victor's father in their expensive suits, half the population of Black Hollow Ridge dressed in their Sunday finest. They'd all come to witness Clara Whitmore's transformation from burden to bride. At 10:30, her father appeared in the doorway of the preparation room. Howard Whitmore looked older than Clara remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped. But when he saw her in the wedding dress, something like relief washed over his face. "You look beautiful, Clara," he said, and for a moment she almost believed he meant it as a father, rather than as a man whose financial salvation was about to be secured. "Thank you, Papa," Clara said, using the childhood name she hadn't employed in years. He crossed the room and took her hands, and Clara was startled to see his eyes were damp. "I know this hasn't been easy," he said quietly. "The preparations, the requirements, all of it. But you've done it. You've saved us." There it was. The truth laid bare. Not, "You're getting married," or "You found happiness," but "You've saved us." "I did what I had to do," Clara said. "You did what family does," her father corrected. "You sacrificed for the greater good. That takes strength, Clara. Real strength. I'm proud of you." The words should have warmed her. Instead, they felt like ice water. He was proud that she'd destroyed herself. Proud that she'd submitted to being reshaped and measured and starved. Proud that she'd learned to make herself smaller. Before Clara could respond, the church bells began to chime. 11 o'clock. Time. Her mother appeared, straightening Clara's veil one last time. "Remember to walk slowly, keep your shoulders back, and smile. Everyone is watching." Everyone was always watching. The processional music began. Some classical piece Clara didn't recognize. Through the crack in the door, she could see Penny starting down the aisle, scattering rose petals, looking like everything Clara was supposed to be: delicate, lovely, uncomplicated. "Ready?" her father asked, offering his arm. Clara took it, her hand trembling, and allowed him to lead her toward the doorway. The sanctuary was packed. Every pew was filled, every eye turned toward her as she appeared at the back of the church. Clara could feel their gazes like physical touches, assessing, judging, measuring. She fixed her eyes on the altar, where Victor stood beside Reverend Thompson, looking immaculate in his tailored suit.
Victor watched her approach with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps. Satisfaction. The look of a man who had invested wisely and was about to collect his returns. The walk down the aisle felt endless. Clara's feet moved mechanically, one step at a time, her father's arm rigid beneath her hand. The faces in the pews blurred together, friends, neighbors, strangers who had nothing better to do on a Friday morning than watch a transaction disguised as a sacrament. Halfway down the aisle, Clara's vision swam. The tight dress made breathing difficult, and the heat from the crowded church and the candles created a stifling atmosphere. She stumbled slightly, and her father's grip on her arm tightened. "Almost there," he whispered. "Don't you dare faint." Clara forced her feet to keep moving. Left, right, closer to the altar, closer to Victor, closer to the moment when she would cease to be Clara Whitmore and become Mrs. Victor Hale. They reached the front of the church, and her father released her arm, placing her hand in Victor's. His palm was cool and dry, his grip firm and possessive. Reverend Thompson opened his Bible, and the ceremony began. Clara heard the words as if from underwater. "Dearly beloved, gathered here today, holy matrimony, joined together." The Reverend's voice droned on, reciting the familiar liturgy, and Clara focused on breathing through the constricting dress, on staying upright, on not collapsing in front of 200 witnesses. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Reverend Thompson intoned, "but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Reverently, deliberately." Clara wanted to laugh at the irony. The Reverend continued through the ceremony's opening, talking about commitment and partnership and love, words that had nothing to do with the arrangement being formalized today. Clara could feel Victor's eyes on her profile, assessing, always assessing. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Reverend Thompson asked. "Her mother and I do," Howard Whitmore said firmly from the front pew. "Who gives this woman?" As if Clara was property to be transferred. "Let us pray," the Reverend said, and the congregation bowed their heads. Clara kept her eyes open, staring at the stained glass window behind the altar. It depicted a dove in flight, wings spread, free. She envied that dove with an intensity that surprised her. The prayer ended, and Reverend Thompson launched into a lengthy sermon about the duties of wives and husbands, about submission and leadership, about building a Christian home. Clara stopped listening. She was too focused on staying conscious, on maintaining the facade, on getting through the next 30 minutes without breaking apart completely. Finally, the Reverend reached the vows. "Victor Hale, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Victor's voice was clear and confident. "I do." "Do you promise to love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep yourself only unto her for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Victor repeated, and there wasn't an ounce of doubt in his voice. Reverend Thompson turned to Clara. "Clara Whitmore, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it, the moment of commitment, the point of no return. Clara opened her mouth to say, "I do." But what came out instead was, "No." The single syllable dropped into the church like a stone into still water. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then gasps rippled through the congregation, a wave of shock spreading from pew to pew. "I'm sorry?" Reverend Thompson said, clearly convinced he'd misheard. "No," Claire repeated, louder this time. "I don't." Victor's hand tightened painfully on hers. "Clara," he hissed, his smile frozen in place. "What are you doing?" "I can't marry you," Clara said, and the words felt like breaking through ice into clear air. "I'm sorry, but I can't." "This is highly irregular," Reverend Thompson began. "Irregular?" Victor's facade cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. His voice rose, filling the church. "This is humiliating. Clara, you agreed to this. Your family agreed to this. We have a contract." "You have a contract with my father," Clara said, pulling her hand free from his. "Not with me." The murmuring in the congregation grew louder. Clara could hear her mother's voice, sharp with panic, and her father's deeper rumble, both of them trying to reach the altar. "I invested 6 months in you," Victor said, and all pretense of affection had vanished. His face was red, his eyes hard. 6 months of waiting while you tried and failed to make yourself presentable. 6 months of public patience while you embarrassed me with your weakness and your complete lack of discipline."
"Then you should be relieved," Clara said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "You don't have to be embarrassed by me anymore."
"You think this is better?"
Victor's laugh was harsh. "You think rejecting me at the altar is less embarrassing than being fat?" The word hit Clara like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard it whispered behind hands for months. At least now it was out in the open. "I think," Clara said clearly, "that you never wanted a wife. You wanted an acquisition, something you could shape and control and display. And I'm sorry, but I'm not for sale."
Her father reached the altar, his face purple with rage. "Clara Whitmore, you get back up here right now and finish this ceremony." "No, Papa." "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Howard grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "We're ruined, completely ruined. The mortgage, the business, everything."
"I know," Clara said, tears streaming down her face now, ruining the carefully applied makeup. "I know what it costs, but I can't do it. I can't spend my life making myself smaller for a man who will never think I'm enough." "You selfish girl," her father spat. "After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices."
"What sacrifices?" Clara demanded, her voice rising to match his. "You starved me. You poisoned me. You paraded me around like livestock, measuring and judging and finding me wanting at every turn. You didn't sacrifice anything. You sacrificed me." The church had erupted into chaos. People were standing, talking over each other, craning to see the drama unfold. Victor stood frozen at the altar, his carefully constructed image crumbling. The Reverend looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "You'll pay for this," Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. "You and your pathetic family. I'll make sure no one in this territory ever does business with you again. I'll destroy you." "You already tried to destroy her," a voice called from the back of the church. "Seems to me she survived just fine." Every head turned toward the source. Clara's heart leapt as she saw Cole Mercer standing in the last pew, still in his work clothes, his hat in his hands, looking completely out of place among the fine suits and elaborate dresses. "This is none of your concern, Mercer," Victor snapped. "It became my concern when I watched this woman nearly die on my land because she was starving herself to meet your impossible standards," Cole said, walking slowly up the aisle. The crowd parted for him like he was Moses at the Red Sea. "It became my concern when I realized the whole town was watching her waste away and calling it a wedding preparation." "Cole, don't," Clara started, terrified he was about to make things worse. But Cole wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Victor with an expression of pure contempt. "You're a coward, Hale," Cole said, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. "You found a good woman, talented, strong, smart, and instead of appreciating what you had, you tried to break her down into something more convenient, something that would look better on your arm, something that wouldn't challenge your fragile ego." "How dare you?" Victor sputtered. "And the saddest part," Cole continued, stopping a few feet from the altar. "She almost let you. She almost killed herself trying to become whatever shallow, empty version of a wife you wanted. But she's braver than both of us combined because she's standing here in front of everyone who matters to her, in front of her whole family, and she's choosing herself. That takes more courage than you've ever had in your entire privileged life." The church was dead silent now. Every eye was on Cole, waiting to see what would happen next. Victor's face had gone from red to nearly purple. "Get out of this church." "Gladly," Cole said. "This wedding is over anyway." He turned to Clara, and his expression softened. "You all right?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then let's go," Cole said simply. "She's not going anywhere with you," Howard Whitmore roared. "Clara, you will finish this ceremony and salvage what's left of this family's reputation. Or so help me." "Or what, Papa?" Clara found her voice again, stronger now. "You'll disown me? Cut me off? I don't think you understand. I have nothing left to lose. You already took everything, my health, my business, my autonomy. The only thing I have left is my choice. And I'm choosing to leave." She gathered her skirts and stepped away from the altar. Her mother was weeping dramatically in the front pew, being comforted by Penny. Her father looked like he might have a stroke. Victor stood frozen, humiliated and furious, in front of 200 witnesses. Clara walked down the aisle toward Cole,
each step feeling lighter than the last. She was vaguely aware of the gasps and whispers that followed her, the scandalized faces, the shock rippling through the crowd. But she didn't care anymore. For the first time in 6 months, she didn't care what anyone thought. She reached Cole, and he offered his arm. Clara took it, and together they walked out of the church into the bright morning sunshine. Behind them, the church erupted. Clara could hear her father shouting, her mother wailing, Victor demanding someone do something. But the sounds grew fainter as she and Cole descended the church steps and crossed the street to where his horse was tied. "Can you ride in that dress?" Cole asked. Clara looked down at the elaborate gown, the train dragging in the dust, the tight bodice that had been torturing her all morning. "No," she said, "but I can fix that." Before Cole could stop her, Clara grabbed a fistful of the train and tore. The expensive silk ripped with a satisfying sound. She tore again and again until the back of the dress hung in tatters and her legs were free. "Better," she said, breathless and slightly hysterical. Cole stared at her for a moment, then started to laugh. It was a deep, genuine sound, and it made Clara laugh too, giddy with relief and terror and the sheer absurdity of what she'd just done. "Come on," Cole said, helping her onto the horse. "Let's get you somewhere safe before your father organizes a lynch mob." They rode through town at a measured pace. Clara still in her destroyed wedding dress, Cole beside her on foot leading the horse. People stared from doorways and windows, already spreading the news. By nightfall, everyone in 3 counties would know what Clara Whitmore had done. She'd humiliated Victor Hale, destroyed her family's last chance at financial salvation, walked out of her own wedding with a rancher most decent folk avoided. She'd chosen herself. And as Black Hollow Ridge fell away behind them and the open range stretched out ahead, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 months. Freedom. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely uncertain, but it was hers. The reality of what she'd done hit Clara fully about 2 miles outside of town. She was sitting sideways on Cole's horse, the remains of her wedding dress bunched awkwardly around her legs, watching Black Hollow Ridge shrink to a collection of distant shapes on the horizon. The adrenaline that had carried her down the church aisle and out the door was fading, replaced by a cold understanding of the consequences. She had no money, no clothes except the torn gown she was wearing, no plan beyond getting away from the church before her father could drag her back to the altar. She'd destroyed her family's last hope for financial stability and humiliated the most powerful man in the territory in front of hundreds of witnesses. "You're shaking," Cole said, glancing up at her from where he walked beside the horse. "I just ruined my entire life," Clara said, hearing the tremor in her own voice. "You saved your life," Cole corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, I've accomplished nothing except making everything worse. My family is still broke. Victor will make sure they're completely ostracized, and Clara's voice caught. "I have absolutely nothing." Cole stopped walking, and the horse halted obediently. He looked up at Clara, his expression serious. "You have yourself. That's more than you had this morning. Myself isn't going to pay the mortgage or feed my family, or your family spent 6 months trying to erase you," Cole said bluntly. "They starved you, poisoned you, measured you like livestock. At what point do you stop sacrificing yourself for people who never valued you to begin with?" The words were harsh but true, and they cut through Clara's panic like a knife. She took a shaky breath, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we get you somewhere safe. Then we figure out next steps." Cole started walking again. One thing at a time. They reached the Mercer Ranch as the sun climbed toward noon. Clara slid off the horse, her legs unsteady, and looked around at the simple buildings and open land. It looked different than it had a few days ago, not like a temporary refuge, but like a potential new beginning. "Come inside," Cole said, leading the horse toward the stable. "You need to get out of that dress and eat something." The practicality of his concern steadied Clara. She followed him into the house, acutely aware of how ridiculous she must look in the destroyed wedding gown, her elaborate hairstyle falling apart, her face streaked with tears and melted cosmetics. Cole disappeared into the back room and returned with a simple cotton dress. "This was my sister's," he said. "She left it here years ago. It should fit well enough for now." "You have a sister?" Clara realized she knew almost nothing about Cole Mercer beyond what town gossip provided, and most of that was unreliable. She moved to Oregon 5 years ago, married a timberman. This ranch was our father's. I bought out her share when she left. Cole handed Clara the dress. You can change in there. I'll make something to eat. Clara took the dress and retreated to the spare room where she'd slept days earlier. She struggled with the pearl buttons on the back of the wedding gown, finally managing to unfasten enough to wriggle free. The dress pooled at her feet, an expensive ruin, and Clara felt a surge of savage satisfaction at its destruction. The cotton dress was simple and worn soft, the kind of practical garment Clara hadn't been allowed to wear in months. It fit loosely, comfortable, and when Clara caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Without the elaborate styling and restrictive clothing, she looked younger, rawer, more real. She scrubbed the makeup off her face with water from the basin, unpinned her hair, and let it fall loose around her shoulders. And by the time she emerged from the room, she felt more like herself than she had in half a year. Cole had put together a simple meal: bread, cheese, cold chicken, and fresh milk. The same meal he'd offered her before, Clara realized. He set it on the table without ceremony. Eat, he said simply. This time, Clara didn't hesitate. She was ravenous, and the food tasted like liberation. She ate slowly but steadily, and Cole sat across from her with his coffee, not watching but present, giving her space to simply exist. Thank you, Clara said when she'd finished, for everything, for coming to the church, for standing up to Victor, for bringing me here. I don't know what I would have done if you would have figured it out, Cole interrupted. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Cole said. It's being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You walked away from a wedding that would have destroyed you. That's as brave as anything I've ever seen. Clara wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. What if I made the wrong choice? What if... A sound outside cut her off, the rapid approach of hoofbeats and wagon wheels. Cole was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. His expression darkened. Who is it? Clara asked, already knowing the answer would be bad. Your father, Cole said grimly. And he's not alone. Looks like he brought half the town council and Sheriff Morrison. Clara's stomach dropped. She moved to the window and saw them, her father in the front seat of a wagon, his face set with grim determination, Sheriff Morrison on horseback beside him, and 3 other men Clara recognized as business associates of her father's. They pulled to a stop in front of the house, and Howard Whitmore climbed down with the careful movements of a man barely controlling his rage. Stay inside, Cole said, already heading for the door. No, Clara said quickly. This is my problem. It's not your problem anymore. It's ours. Cole's tone left no room for argument. Stay inside. He stepped out onto the porch, and Clara positioned herself where she could see and hear without being immediately visible. Mercer, her father called out, his voice carrying across the yard. Send my daughter out, now. Clara's not going anywhere, Cole said calmly. She's my daughter. She's coming home. She's a grown woman who made a choice. You need to respect that. Howard's face flushed deep red. You don't understand what you've involved yourself in. That girl has obligations, responsibilities. She can't just run away because she got cold feet. Those weren't her obligations, Cole said. Those were yours. You're the one who arranged the marriage, who made the deal with Hale, who pushed her into something she clearly didn't want. A daughter's duty is to her family. A father's duty is to protect his daughter, Cole shot back, not sell her to the highest bidder. Sheriff Morrison shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable. Mercer, this is a family matter. Maybe you should let them work it out. It stopped being a family matter when they started treating Clara like property, Cole said. She destroyed a legal agreement one of the other men, Mr. Thornton from the bank, interjected. Victor Hale had a contract with the Whitmore family. There are financial penalties for breach of contract. Take it up with Howard, then, Cole said. Clara didn't sign anything. She's his daughter. He has legal authority. She's 24 years old. She's of age. He has no legal authority to force her into a marriage she doesn't want. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for Cole's steady defense, but she could see her father's fury building. This was escalating in dangerous directions. She stepped out onto the porch, and every eye turned to her. Clara, her father said, and she heard genuine desperation beneath the anger. Please, come home. We'll talk this through. Fix things with Victor. It's not too late. Yes, it is, Clara said quietly. Papa, I can't marry Victor. I won't. You don't understand what's at stake. The mortgage is due in 3 weeks. If we don't have that money, then you'll lose the house, Clara finished. I know, and I'm sorry for that, truly, but I can't sacrifice myself to save it. Sacrifice? Howard's voice rose. We gave you everything: food, shelter, education. We built that bakery for you, and this is how you repay us? By humiliating this family in front of the entire town. You built the bakery for yourselves, Clara said, her voice strengthening. You used my skill to generate income, and when that wasn't enough, you tried to sell me like livestock. Don't pretend this was about my welfare. How dare you speak to me that way?
I dare because I finally understand that I don't owe you my life, Clara said.
I tried, Papa.
For 6 months, I starved myself, poisoned myself, made myself sick trying to become what Victor wanted, and it was never enough. I would have died trying to meet his standards, and you would have called it a noble sacrifice.
You're being hysterical.
She's being honest, Cole interjected.
Maybe you should listen.
Howard turned his fury on Cole.
This is your fault. You put ideas in her head, turned her against her own family. I offered her food and a safe place to rest, Cole said. If that was enough to turn her against you, maybe you should examine what you were offering. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. Mercer's right, Howard. Clara's an adult. We can't force her to go home if she doesn't want to.
But we can make sure she understands the consequences of her choices, Mr. Thornton said, his voice oily with implication. The Whitmore family owes the bank a substantial sum. With Victor Hale's investment no longer forthcoming, that debt will need to be called in. And if Clara is choosing to abandon her family in their time of need, well, the court of public opinion will have thoughts about that. The threat was clear. They would ruin the Whitmore name completely, and Clara would be blamed for all of it. Clara felt the familiar weight of guilt settling back onto her shoulders. This was exactly what she'd feared, that her choice would destroy not just her own future, but her family's as well. How much? Cole asked suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. How much does the Whitmore family owe? That's not your concern, Howard said stiffly. I'm making it my concern. How much? Mr. Thornton consulted a small notebook he'd pulled from his coat. $3,200, including accumulated interest. Cole was quiet for a moment, doing calculations. Then he nodded. I'll pay it. The yard went silent. What? Howard said. I'll pay the mortgage, Cole repeated. As a business loan to Howard Whitmore. Standard interest rates, same terms the bank would offer. Payable over 10 years. That gives your freight business time to recover.
Why would you do that? Mr. Thornton asked suspiciously. Because I can. Because it's the right thing to do, and because it removes Clara from the equation entirely. Cole looked at Howard. You get your financial relief without selling your daughter. Clara gets her freedom. Everyone wins. I don't want your charity, Howard said, but his voice had lost its conviction. It's not charity. It's a business arrangement. I'll draw up proper papers, make it all legal and binding. Cole's expression was implacable. The only condition is that you leave Clara alone. No more pressure to reconcile with Hale. No more guilt about family duty. She gets to make her own choices. Clara stared at Cole in shock. This was exactly what he'd offered before, but she'd been too afraid to accept. Now he was making it happen regardless, removing her ability to refuse out of misplaced guilt. Howard looked torn between pride and desperation. The desperation won. I'd need to see the terms in writing. Come by tomorrow morning. I'll have everything prepared. Cole's tone made it clear the discussion was over. Sheriff Morrison seized on the solution gratefully. Well then, seems like this situation is resolving itself. Howard, you'll get your money. Clara, you'll get your independence. No need for any further drama. But Mr. Thornton wasn't finished. This doesn't address Victor Hale's grievances. He's the aggrieved party here. He spent 6 months courting Miss Whitmore, made arrangements, incurred expenses. Yes. Victor Hale tried to remake a woman into his ideal of acceptability, Cole said flatly. If he wants to sue for damages, let him try. I'd love to see him explain to a judge why he required his bride to lose 30 pounds before he'd marry her. Thornton's mouth snapped shut. That particular detail would not play well in any legal setting. Howard stood there for a long moment, visibly wrestling with his pride. Finally, he looked at Clara. Is this really what you want? To To throw away everything we built for you? You didn't build it for me, Papa, Clara said sadly. You built it for yourselves. I'm just taking back what was mine to begin with. Her father's face hardened. Fine. Take Mercer's money. Ruin your reputation. But don't come crying back when you realize what you've lost. I won't, Clara said.
Howard climbed back onto the wagon, and the other men followed his lead, mounting their horses. Sheriff Morrison tipped his hat to Cole, a gesture of respect, then turned his horse back toward town. As the group rode away, Clara felt her knees go weak. Cole's hand was instantly at her elbow, steadying her. You all right? He asked. I don't know, Clara said honestly. You just offered to pay my family's entire debt. Cole, that's more money than I can ever repay. I didn't lend it to you. I lent it to your father. His business is profitable when he manages it properly. He'll pay it back. But why? Why would you do this for people you barely know? Cole guided her back inside the house and sat her down at the table. Because you deserve to be free without carrying the weight of your family's finances. Because your father made bad choices, and you shouldn't have to pay for them with your life. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because I've spent the last few days watching you fight for yourself, and I want to see what you can do when you're not fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Clara felt tears building again, but these were different from the panicked tears in the church. These were tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know how I'll ever... Don't, Cole said gently. Don't start calculating debt and obligation. We're not doing that. You're free, Clara. Actually free. Figure out what you want to do with that. The weight of possibility was almost as overwhelming as the weight of obligation had been. Clara had spent so long being told what to do, who to be, how to exist, that the idea of choosing for herself felt foreign and frightening. I don't know where to start, she admitted. Start with staying here for a few days, Cole suggested. Get your strength back, eat real food, sleep without nightmares, then we'll figure out next steps. Over the following week, Clara did exactly that. She slept in the spare room, ate 3 meals a day, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to live in a body that wasn't constantly screaming for sustenance. The tremors from Dr. Callahan's treatments gradually subsided. Her heart rate normalized. The constant dizziness faded. Cole gave her space but was always present when she needed him. He taught her to ride properly, to mend fences, to identify the different cattle on his range. He showed her the account books for his ranch and explained how he'd built a profitable operation through careful management and smart breeding choices. You have a mind for numbers, he observed one afternoon when she'd helped him calculate feed costs. Ever thought about running a business? I ran the bakery, Clara said, before my mother took it over to focus on wedding preparations. Why don't you take it back? The idea hadn't occurred to Clara. Penny's running it now. Is she any good at it? Clara thought about the complaints she'd heard before the wedding, the declining quality, the lost customers. Not really. She's competent, but she doesn't have the passion for it. Then take it back, Cole said simply. It's your business, your recipes, your reputation. Take it back and run it properly. The more Clara thought about it, the more the idea took hold. The bakery had been her sanctuary, her creative outlet, her pride. Reclaiming it felt like reclaiming herself. But when she mentioned the idea to Cole that evening, he raised a concern she hadn't considered. You'll need to go back to town for that, he said. Face everyone, deal with the gossip. Clara's stomach clenched. She'd been avoiding thinking about Black Hollow Ridge, about the scandal she'd created, about how people would treat her now. They'll destroy me, she said quietly. Maybe, Cole agreed. Or maybe they'll surprise you. Either way, you can't hide out here forever. At some point, you have to walk back into your life. He was right, but that didn't make it less terrifying. The decision was made for her 3 days later when Penny appeared at the ranch, riding a borrowed horse and looking exhausted. Clara, she said, dismounting quickly, I need to talk to you. Clara had been feeding chickens in the yard. She set down the bucket and approached her sister cautiously. How did you know I was here? Everyone knows you're here, Penny said. The whole town is talking about nothing else. But that's not why I came. Clara, Mother is sick. Clara's heart seized. What's wrong? She collapsed 2 days ago. Dr. Callahan says it's her heart. The stress of everything, the wedding, the scandal, the financial situation.
It's been too much. Penny's eyes filled with tears. She's been asking for you. The old guilt surged back immediately, but Clara forced herself to think clearly. What about Papa? He's barely left her bedside. He won't talk to anyone, won't deal with the business. Everything is falling apart, Clara. Penny grabbed her sister's hands. I know you're angry at them. I know they treated you terribly, but she's our mother, and she's asking for you. Clara looked back at the house where Cole had emerged onto the porch, watching the interaction. He met her eyes and gave a small nod. Your choice. I'll come, Clara said. But I'm not staying, and I'm not reconciling with Victor. I know, Penny said. I wouldn't ask you to. Mother needs to see that you're all right, that we haven't lost you completely. They rode back to town together, and with every mile, Clara felt the weight of judgment settling back onto her shoulders. By the time they reached the Whitmore house, her hands were shaking again. Not from hunger this time, but from anxiety. The house looked different somehow, smaller and shabbier than she remembered. Penny led her inside and up the stairs to their parents' bedroom, where Margaret Whitmore lay propped against pillows, looking frighteningly pale and fragile. Clara, she whispered when she saw her daughter, you came. Of course I came, Clara said, moving to her mother's bedside. Penny said you were ill. Margaret's hand reached out, trembling, and Clara took it. Her mother's fingers were cold and thin, and Clara was shocked by how much she'd deteriorated in just over a week. I'm sorry, Margaret said, tears sliding down her cheeks. For everything, for pushing you so hard, for not listening, her voice broke, for being so focused on what I wanted that I couldn't see what it was doing to you. Clara felt her own tears building. This was the apology she'd needed 6 months ago, before the starvation and the poison and the desperate wedding preparations. But hearing it now, seeing her mother's genuine remorse, still meant something. I forgive you, Clara said quietly. But I can't come back, Mother. I can't go back to being who you wanted me to be. I know, Margaret said, and I'm not asking you to. I just needed to see that you're all right, that you're safe, that you're... She looked at Clara more closely, and something like wonder crossed her face. You look healthier than I've seen you in months. I've been eating, Clara said simply. Good, her mother whispered. That's good. They sat together for a while longer, talking quietly about inconsequential things, carefully avoiding the topics that would hurt. When Margaret finally drifted off to sleep, Clara kissed her forehead and slipped out of the room. Her father was waiting in the hallway, and the sight of him stopped Clara in her tracks. Howard Whitmore looked like he'd aged 20 years, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow, his shoulders bent under invisible weight. Clara, he said roughly, thank you for coming. How is she really? Clara asked. Weak. The doctor says she needs rest and to avoid stress, which is impossible given our current situation. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Mercer came by yesterday with the loan papers. They're fair terms. More than fair. He's a good man, Clara said. He must be to involve himself in this mess. Howard's expression was complicated. Shame, gratitude, lingering resentment. I signed them. The bank will be paid off by the end of the week. That's good news? It's complicated news, her father corrected. We're not ruined financially, but socially. Clara, the damage to our reputation is severe. Victor has made sure of that. And the bakery is struggling. Penny does her best, but she's not you. Clara saw her opening. Then let me take it back. I'll run the bakery again, rebuild the business properly. Howard looked at her in surprise. You do that? After everything? The bakery was always mine, Clara said. I built it. I earned its reputation, and I'm the only one who can save it now. Her father was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right. The bakery is yours again. But Clara, people will talk. They'll say terrible things. Victor is making sure of that. Let them talk, Clara said with more confidence than she felt. I've survived worse than gossip. But she hadn't anticipated just how bad the gossip would be, or how Victor Hale's vengeance would take a form far more sinister than words. She found out the next morning when Sheriff Morrison arrived at the ranch with a warrant and 3 armed deputies. Clara was kneading dough in Cole's kitchen when she heard the horses approach. She'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm over the past few days, rising early to bake,
helping Cole with ranch work in the afternoons, spending evenings planning how she'd rebuild the bakery business. For the first time in months, she felt purposeful, useful, alive. But the sound of multiple riders made her freeze, flour dusting her hands, a cold premonition crawling up her spine. Cole appeared in the doorway from outside, his expression dark. It's Sheriff Morrison, with deputies and a couple men I don't recognize. Clara's heart hammered. What do they want? I don't know, but stay inside while I find out. Clara moved to the window where she could see without being immediately visible. Sheriff Morrison sat tall in his saddle, flanked by two deputies Clara recognized from town. But it was the other two men who made her blood run cold. Dr. Callahan, looking uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact, and a thin man in a black suit she'd never seen before. Cole stepped onto the porch, his posture deceptively relaxed, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Sheriff, what brings you out here? Morrison dismounted, pulling a folded document from his coat. I've got a warrant here, Mercer, for Clara Whitmore. A warrant for what? Cole's voice was dangerously calm. Involuntary commitment to the Territorial Asylum in Helena. Morrison looked genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, Cole. I don't like this any more than you do, but it's legal and properly signed. Clara felt the room tilt. Asylum. They were going to have her committed. Cole's hands clenched into fists. On what grounds? The man in the black suit dismounted and approached the porch with the careful movements of someone accustomed to dealing with volatile situations. I'm Dr. Edmund Pierce, Chief Physician at the Helena Territorial Asylum. Miss Whitmore has been reported as suffering from severe mental instability, hysteria, and moral degradation. Her father, Howard Whitmore, has signed the commitment papers as her legal guardian. She's 24 years old, Cole said. He's not her legal guardian. Under territorial law, an unmarried woman's father retains guardianship until she reaches 25 or marries, Dr. Pierce said smoothly. Mr. Whitmore has provided extensive documentation of Miss Whitmore's erratic behavior, abandoning her wedding at the altar, destroying her wedding gown, fleeing to the home of an unmarried man with whom she has no familial relationship, engaging in behavior unbecoming of a woman of decent character. That's insane, Cole said flatly. That's precisely the point, Mr. Mercer. These are symptoms of a severely disturbed mind requiring professional intervention and care. Dr. Pierce gestured to Dr. Callahan. Dr. Callahan has provided medical testimony about Miss Whitmore's condition, the extreme weight loss, the physical deterioration, the emotional instability. Dr. Callahan finally looked up, and Clara saw guilt written across his features. I documented her treatments, he said quietly, the medications, the physical symptoms. When Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Hale approached me about providing a medical assessment, you betrayed her, Cole finished. You poisoned her for 6 months, then used her suffering as evidence she's insane. I was trying to help. You were trying to cover your own ass, Cole snapped. You know damn well Claire's not insane. She's the sanest person in this entire mess. Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Cole, I don't like this either, but the papers are in order. Dr. Pierce is a licensed physician. Dr. Callahan has provided medical documentation, and her father has signed the commitment order. Legally, I have to enforce it. Clara couldn't stay silent any longer. She stepped out onto the porch, and every eye turned to her. Dr. Pierce's gaze swept over her with clinical assessment, evaluating, categorizing, reducing her to a collection of symptoms. I'm not going, Clara said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. Miss Whitmore, Dr. Pierce said in the patronizing tone of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult patients, I understand you're frightened, but the asylum is a place of healing. We'll help you recover from whatever trauma has caused your current mental distress. The only trauma I've experienced is being starved and poisoned to meet impossible standards, Clara said. I walked away from an abusive situation. That's not insanity. That's survival. You destroyed a legally binding arrangement and fled to live in sin with a man you barely know, Dr. Pierce countered. You've exhibited extreme emotional volatility, engaged in self-destructive behavior, and shown a complete disregard for social propriety. These are clear indicators of moral insanity. Moral insanity, Clara repeated, bitter laughter escaping. You mean I refuse to let myself be sold like cattle? I mean you've demonstrated an inability to conform to accepted social norms, which suggests a fundamental defect in moral reasoning. Dr. Pierce nodded to the deputies. Gentlemen, please escort Miss Whitmore to the carriage. The deputies moved forward, and Cole stepped between them and Clara. You're not taking her. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your concern for Miss Whitmore, but interfering with a legal commitment is a criminal offense, Sheriff Morrison warned. Don't make this worse. Worse? Cole's voice rose. They're trying to lock up a perfectly sane woman because she refused to marry a man who treated her like property. How does it get worse than that? By getting yourself arrested for obstruction, Morrison said. Cole, please, step aside. Behind the house, Clara heard more horses approaching. Her heart sank. Reinforcements, probably. Victor must have planned this carefully, ensuring overwhelming force to prevent any resistance. But when the riders came around the side of the house, Clara's breath caught. It wasn't more deputies. It was a single man on a dark horse, dressed in formal attire with a leather satchel strapped to his saddle. He was older, perhaps 60, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that took in the scene with immediate understanding. He dismounted with practiced ease and approached the porch. Territorial Judge Marcus Brennan, he announced, his voice carrying authority. I received an urgent message this morning about a questionable commitment proceeding. I see I arrived just in time. Dr. Pierce's confidence faltered. Judge Brennan, this is unexpected. I assure you, everything is being conducted according to proper legal procedure. Is it? Judge Brennan pulled documents from his satchel. Because I've reviewed the commitment papers filed with the territorial court, and I have several concerns. Sheriff Morrison, may I see the warrant? Morrison handed over the document, and Judge Brennan examined it carefully. His expression grew increasingly stern. This warrant is based on a petition filed by Howard Whitmore as guardian of his adult daughter. However, I have here a document filed with the court 3 days ago that supersedes his authority. The judge produced another paper. A marriage license properly executed and witnessed between Clara Whitmore and Cole Mercer. The words hit Clara like a thunderbolt. She stared at Cole, who looked equally shocked. That's impossible, Dr. Pierce sputtered. There's no record of any marriage, because it was filed directly with the territorial court rather than the county clerk, Judge Brennan said. A legal option available to couples in unusual circumstances. The marriage is valid and binding, which means Howard Whitmore no longer has any legal authority over his daughter. Her husband does. Cole found his voice first. Judge, I appreciate the intervention, but I never filed— I did, another voice called from the path leading to the ranch. Everyone turned to see Penny Whitmore riding up on a bay mare, her face flushed from hard riding. She dismounted quickly and hurried forward. I filed it, Penny repeated, looking at Clara with fierce determination. 2 days ago. I forged both your signatures and convinced Sheriff Morrison's deputy to witness it. Then I rode to Helena to file it directly with the territorial court because I knew Papa and Victor were planning something. You forged a marriage license? Sheriff Morrison said, shocked. I protected my sister, Penny shot back. Papa has been meeting with Victor and Dr. Pierce for a week. They were planning this commitment. I heard them discussing it, how they'd use the asylum to break Clara, force her to comply, make her so desperate she'd agree to marry Victor just to get out. The casual cruelty of the plan stole Clara's breath. Victor hadn't accepted her rejection. He'd simply found another way to trap her. Dr. Pierce cleared his throat. Judge Brennan, even if this marriage license is legitimate, which I seriously doubt, it doesn't change the fact that Miss Whitmore is clearly suffering from mental distress. Perhaps her new husband would be willing to sign the commitment papers instead. Her new husband would burn those papers and scatter the ashes, Cole said flatly. He turned to Judge Brennan. But respectfully, Your Honor, that license is forged. I never agreed to marry Clara. Clara's heart plummeted. Of course he hadn't. Penny had overstepped catastrophically, and now they were all complicit in fraud. But Judge Brennan was studying Cole with shrewd eyes. You never agreed in the past tense, Mr. Mercer. Do you agree now? The question hung in the air. Cole looked at Clara, and she saw a dozen emotions flash across his face. Surprise, concern, calculation, and something else she couldn't quite identify. If it keeps her out of that asylum, Cole said slowly, then yes, I agree. That's duress, Dr. Pierce protested. The marriage would be invalid. It's choice, Judge Brennan corrected. Mr. Mercer is being asked if he consents to marry Miss Whitmore. He's stating that he does. Miss Whitmore, do you consent to marry Mr. Mercer? Clara looked at Cole. At this man who had fed her when she was starving, defended her against her own family, offered to pay her father's debts without asking for anything in return, who had seen her at her lowest point and never once suggested she needed to change, who was now offering to tie himself legally to her to save her from being locked away. "Yes," Clara said. "I consent."
Then the marriage is valid as of this moment, Judge Brennan declared. I'm authorized to perform marriages in the territory. Do you, Cole Mercer, take Clara Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Cole said without hesitation. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take Cole Mercer to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Clara whispered. Then by the authority vested in me by the Montana Territory, I declare you husband and wife. Judge Brennan turned to Dr. Pierce with cold satisfaction. Your commitment papers are now invalid. Miss Whitmore is Mrs. Mercer, and her husband has not signed any such request. Sheriff Morrison, I believe your business here is concluded. Morrison looked relieved. Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Pierce, Dr. Callahan, we'll be heading back to town. Cole, Clara, congratulations on your marriage. Dr. Pierce's face had gone purple with rage. This is fraud. I'll have this marriage annulled. On what grounds? Judge Brennan asked mildly. Both parties are of legal age and sound mind. Both consented freely in front of witnesses. The marriage is valid. I suggest you return to Helena and inform whoever hired you that their plan has failed. Victor Hale won't let this stand, Dr. Pierce said. He has influence, and I have jurisdiction, Judge Brennan said. Now get off Mr. Mercer's property before I hold you in contempt. Dr. Pierce stalked back to his carriage, Dr. Callahan following like a whipped dog. The deputies mounted their horses, and within minutes the entire group was riding away, leaving Clara, Cole, Penny, and Judge Brennan standing in the yard. Clara's legs suddenly wouldn't hold her. She sat down hard on the porch steps, her mind reeling. She was married, to Cole Mercer, to save herself from an asylum. Judge Brennan approached and sat beside her, his formal demeanor softening. Miss Penny sent me a telegram explaining the situation. I've known your family for years, Clara. Your father is a desperate man making terrible choices, but I couldn't let him destroy you to save himself. Thank you, Clara managed. But the marriage, Cole didn't really agree. This isn't fair to him. I agreed, Cole said, sitting on her other side. Maybe not to the forged license, but to the marriage itself. I meant what I said. But you barely know me, Clara protested. And now you're legally bound to a strong, talented woman who deserves better than what she's been given, Cole finished. I know enough. And if you're worried about obligation, don't be. We'll figure out what this marriage looks like as we go. Judge Brennan stood, dusting off his pants. I'll file the proper paperwork with the court. As far as the territory is concerned, you've been married for 3 days. That should forestall any other schemes your father and Mr. Hale might attempt. He looked at Penny. Young lady, forging legal documents is a serious crime, but given the circumstances, I'm inclined to overlook it. This time. Thank you, Your Honor, Penny said. I'd do it again, though. Clara's my sister. After the judge left, promising to stay in town overnight to ensure no further trouble arose, the three of them sat in silence for a long moment. I should go back, Penny said finally. Mother will be worried, and I need to make sure Papa doesn't try anything else. Be careful, Clara warned. If Papa finds out you're the one who warned the judge. He won't, Penny said firmly. I'll tell him I came to try to convince you to come home. He'll believe that. She hugged Clara tightly. You deserve to be happy. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for choosing yourself. After Penny rode away, Clara and Cole remained on the porch, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. I'm sorry, Clara said quietly. You shouldn't have been forced into this. I wasn't forced, Cole said. I chose, just like you did. But marriage, that's permanent, that's binding. You barely know me, and now you're stuck with… Cole turned to face her fully. Clara, stop. I'm not stuck with anything. I made a choice based on what I know about you. That you're brave enough to walk away from everything you've ever known, rather than let yourself be diminished. That you're talented enough to build a business from nothing. That you're strong enough to survive 6 months of systematic abuse and still come out fighting. That's enough knowledge to build a partnership on. A partnership, Clara repeated, testing the word. That's what marriage should be, isn't it? 2 people working together toward common goals. We can figure out the rest as we go. Cole's expression was serious, but not unkind. I'm not asking you to love me.
I'm not even asking you to stay if you don't want to. But while we're married, you're safe, you're protected, and you're free to become whoever you want to be." Clara felt tears building, but they were different than the tears she'd cried so many times over the past months. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of possibility. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Thank me by rebuilding that bakery," Cole said. "Show this town what you're capable of when you're not being crushed under their expectations." Over the following weeks, that's exactly what Clara did. She returned to town as Mrs. Cole Mercer, wearing the identity-like armor against the gossip that swirled in her wake. The whispers followed her everywhere, improper, scandalous, shameful, but Clara had learned to let them slide off without sticking. She reclaimed her bakery from Penny, who handed it over with visible relief. The business was in worse shape than Clara had expected: lost customers, damaged reputation, equipment in disrepair. But Clara had survived worse than a failing business. She started small, focusing on quality over quantity. She woke before dawn to bake bread that filled the streets with the scent of yeast and warmth. She experimented with new recipes, drawing on techniques she'd always wanted to try but never had the courage to attempt. She hired 2 young women from town whose families had fallen on hard times, giving them fair wages and teaching them the trade. Slowly, customers began returning. First, it was people who'd always liked her bread and didn't care about scandal. Then it was curious newcomers who'd heard about the infamous Clara Mercer and wanted to see what the fuss was about. Then it was people who simply couldn't resist the quality of what she was producing. Within a month, the bakery was profitable again. Within 2 months, Clara had expanded the menu and extended the hours. Within 3 months, she'd paid back Cole for the supplies and equipment repairs, and the business was thriving beyond anything she'd achieved before the engagement. Cole supported her quietly but steadily. He helped her transport goods to neighboring towns, negotiated fair prices with suppliers, and stood like a wall between Clara and anyone who tried to resurrect the old criticisms. Their marriage remained unconventional. Cole respected her space, never demanding more than she was willing to give, and Clara gradually learned to trust the partnership they were building. They shared meals and conversation, worked side by side on ranch and bakery tasks, and slowly became friends who happened to be legally bound to each other. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon, 4 months after the aborted wedding, that Victor Hale finally made his move. Clara was closing the bakery for the day when Victor walked in, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits who looked like lawyers. Clara's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. "Victor," she said coolly, "what can I do for you?" "You can stop pretending this farce of a marriage is legitimate," Victor said, his polished veneer cracking to reveal the bitterness beneath. "I've had my attorneys review the documents. The marriage license was forged. The ceremony was conducted under duress. None of it is legal." "Judge Brennan disagrees," Clara said. "Judge Brennan is an old fool who was manipulated by your scheming sister," Victor snapped. "I'm filing for annulment on your behalf. Once the marriage is dissolved, we can revisit our original arrangement." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "You think I would ever marry you after this? After you tried to have me committed?" "You don't have a choice," Victor said. "Your father still owes a substantial debt. To Cole Mercer now, instead of to me, but debt nonetheless. When the marriage is annulled, that loan will become void. Mercer won't have any legal standing to hold it." "That's not how loans work," Clara said. "It is when the loan was made contingent on a fraudulent marriage," one of the lawyers interjected. "We've examined Mr. Mercer's agreement with your father. The terms specifically reference your marriage to Mr. Mercer as a condition of the loan. If the marriage is fraudulent, the loan is invalid." Clara felt cold spreading through her chest. Could they really do this? Dissolve her marriage and invalidate Cole's loan in one move? "There's a simple solution," Victor said, his tone turning unctuous. "Drop this ridiculous pretense with Mercer. Marry me as originally planned. I'm willing to overlook the embarrassment you caused, the months of scandal. We'll call it temporary insanity brought on by wedding nerves. Dr. Pierce will provide the documentation." "No?" Clara said flatly. "Then your family loses everything, and Mercer loses $3,000, Victor said. "Is your pride really worth that much?" Before Clara could respond, the door opened and Cole walked in, followed closely by Judge Brennan. Clara had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. "Gentlemen," Judge Brennan said pleasantly, "I understand there's some confusion about the validity of a certain marriage." Victor's confidence didn't waver. "Your Honor, with all respect, New evidence has come to light about the circumstances of Clara Whitmore's previous engagement to you, Judge Brennan interrupted. Yes, I've become quite familiar with the details, including the contract that required her to lose 30 pounds before you'd marry her, the medical testimony from Dr. Callahan about the dangerous treatments you pressured her family to administer, and the commitment papers you filed to have her institutionalized when she refused your terms. Victor's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts that will become part of the public record if you proceed with this annulment petition. Judge Brennan pulled out a thick folder. You see, when Miss Penny Whitmore contacted me, she brought extensive documentation, letters between you and her father discussing how to manage Clara's resistance, medical bills for the thyroid treatments, even a copy of the contract you signed, laying out your precise physical requirements for your bride. The lawyers beside Victor shifted uncomfortably. That contract was a private arrangement, Victor began. That becomes very public the moment you challenge this marriage in court, Judge Brennan said. And I suspect the good people of Montana Territory will have strong opinions about a man who treated a potential bride like a business acquisition, then tried to have her committed when she refused him. You wouldn't dare, Victor said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Try me, Judge Brennan said pleasantly. Additionally, I've reviewed Mr. Mercer's loan agreement with Howard Whitmore. There's no language making it contingent on the marriage. It's a standard business loan, properly executed. Your lawyers are either incompetent or deliberately misleading you. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, perhaps we should reconsider. Shut up, Victor snapped. He turned his fury on Clara. You think you've won? You've destroyed your family's reputation, tied yourself to a dirt-poor rancher, and become the scandal of the territory. Congratulations. I think I chose freedom over imprisonment, Clara said calmly, and I'd make the same choice every single time. Victor's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually strike her. But Cole moved to stand beside her, his presence a quiet threat, and Victor's courage failed. This isn't over, Victor said, but it sounded like the empty threat it was. Yes, Judge Brennan said firmly. It is. Leave these people alone, Mr. Hale. Find someone else to bully. Victor and his lawyers left, and Clara sagged against the counter, exhaustion washing over her. Is it really over? She asked quietly. It's really over, Judge Brennan confirmed. I'll file paperwork making the marriage unassailable, and I'll make sure copies of Hale's contract end up in the right hands. His reputation will survive, but he'll think twice before trying something like this again. After the judge left, Cole helped Clara lock up the bakery. They walked back toward the ranch in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Thank you, Clara said as they crested the ridge overlooking Cole's land, for standing with me, for not backing down. That's what partners do, Cole said simply. Clara stopped walking, turning to face him. Over the past 4 months, she'd learned so much about this quiet man, his dry humor, his unexpected kindness, his absolute integrity. She'd learned that he read poetry in the evenings and could quote Shakespeare from memory, that he'd built his ranch from nothing through sheer determination and smart choices, that he never made promises he couldn't keep. And she'd learned that somewhere along the way her feelings had shifted from gratitude to genuine affection. Cole, she said carefully, this marriage started as a legal necessity, but I was wondering, would you be interested in making it real? Cole was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across his face. I was wondering when you'd ask. You were waiting for me to ask? You needed to come to it on your own, Cole said. I didn't want you to feel obligated or grateful, or like this was just trading one prison for another. Clara stepped closer. I don't feel obligated. I feel... She paused, searching for the right words. I feel like I finally found a partner who sees me as I am and doesn't want to change anything. Cole pulled her into his arms, and Clara felt something inside her finally settle into place. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not someone to complete her, but someone to stand beside her while she completed herself. They kissed as the sun set over the Montana rangeland, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of cruelty and chosen to build something better. Over the following year, Clara expanded her bakery business to 3 neighboring towns, developing a network of reliable suppliers and skilled employees. She and Cole became known for their partnership, her business acumen and his steady support, her creativity and his practicality, working together to build something neither could have achieved alone. The scandal eventually faded, replaced by newer gossip, and Clara found she didn't care anymore what people whispered. She'd learned the hard way that other people's opinions couldn't sustain her, but her own conviction could. Penny eventually married a kind schoolteacher from Helena and moved away, writing Clara long letters about her new life and thanking her older sister for showing her what courage looked like. Margaret recovered from her illness, and while she and Clara never fully reconciled, they reached an uneasy peace. Howard paid back Cole's loan over 10 years, just as agreed, rebuilding his business through honest work rather than desperate schemes. And Victor Hale eventually left Black Hollow Ridge for San Francisco, where his particular brand of entitled cruelty could disappear into a larger, more anonymous city. Clara sometimes thought about the woman she'd been that day at the altar, hollow, starving, desperate, convinced she had to disappear to deserve existence. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she'd known briefly and left behind. The Clara who remained was stronger, freer, unafraid to take up space in the world. She'd learned that she was never too much. She'd simply been surrounded by people too small to deserve her. And beside a man who had never asked her to shrink, she'd finally stepped into the life she was meant to live. On the first anniversary of their impromptu wedding, Cole presented Clara with a gift: the deed to a new property in town, perfect for a second bakery location.
I didn't buy it for you, he clarified quickly. I bought it for us.